Yo, what is up everybody, Jelly Gray here and welcome back to another Naruto reaction video here today. And today we got yet another video by the grade 6, and as you tell by the title, this is Madara versus the Akatsuki in 2021. So folks, it's been a while since we've reacted to one of these kinds of videos, right? And I didn't even know that 6 had this on his channel, so as soon as I saw it and was aware of it, I had to react to it. So here we are today. Now, I know Swag and I believe Seth as well have both done videos on this very topic itself. Madara versus the Akatsuki, right? When we look at it empirically, Madara just has feats far superior to the Akatsuki in its entirety. And you could probably even argue that Madara solos the Akatsuki one-on-one, meaning Madara by himself versus the entire Akatsuki, right? You'd have to go probably deeper in depth to make a better argument for that. But Madara is just in another tier, right? There's tiers in Naruto, with 6 paths at the top, God tier, which is where Madara alive is probably at, and then you have like S plus, where some of the Akatsuki are at, like Itachi, Obito, Pain, etc. And I'm assuming 6 will have the same premise in conclusion that Seth and Swag had, which is that Madara most likely solos the Akatsuki in its entirety. But either way, I'm very intrigued to see what 6 has to say about this one today. But before we begin, anyways, really appreciate it. Hit that like button, turn on bell notifications to stay updated with yours truly. And if you're new and you enjoy, man, and you mess up the kid, make sure to hit that sub button, because once you do, you become part of the family forever. But let's not waste any more time, screen. See what 6 says today.
Madara vs. the Akatsuki in 2021. If you've been in the Naruto community for any reasonable amount of time, anywhere from 3 years ago to even maybe just a few months ago, I'm sure you've seen or at least heard of the 2 videos from my buddy Swag Kage covering this topic way back when with Clyde, and then the follow-up video he did alone. Seth also covered this topic sometime around the same time when Swag did, and since combined all those videos have around 5 million views. You've also likely gotten into an argument with your friends or some randoms online about the subject, whether you were on the Akatsuki side or Madara's. Since a few years have passed since then and a lot more people have had time to think about it, I'm pretty sure the large majority of people agree that this is a fight that any relevant version of Madara would probably win. And when I say relevant version, I'm talking about Valley of the End, Edo Tensei, Sage Mode, and any version of Madara post-absorbing the Ten Tails. As time goes on, arguments evolve as people have had more time to look at the series on both sides of the debate, but I'm here to reassure you once again in 2021 that Madara still beats the Akatsuki in all the forms I mentioned prior. In this video, I'm going to be skipping over any version of Madara after he absorbs the Ten Tails. This video will also only be containing material from the manga, so if you think there is maybe something in the anime or game continuity that changes the outcome of the subject, just know that it's not being taken into consideration here because, well, I don't know it. Before we get into the video, this is your first time here, or if you're returning to the channel, make sure to subscribe and like the video if you enjoy this kind of stuff. I do it a lot, but without delaying the inevitable any longer, let's talk about Madara versus the Akatsuki. Before I get into covering the Akatsuki, since I did say my take on the topic at the beginning of the video, I do want to mention that even though they still lose, the Akatsuki was heavily downplayed in the past, and like I said earlier, as time goes on, arguments have evolved, and I'm going to try and scale the Akatsuki where they all should be narratively and how I feel they should be portrayed in the story. We're going to start with some general statements that should apply to all the Akatsuki, excluding maybe White Zetsu, but even then, there should be no issue with this statement applying to him as well. For starters, the Akatsuki should all be at least the level of a Biju. If you don't believe this to be the case for members individually, you'd at least have to acknowledge that the pair of individuals is at this level, because hunting down and capturing Biju or the Jinchuriki is literally their job. This is just demonstrated to be the case in certain members' cases, like with Deidara, who can literally knock out the 3 tails with his bombs, Kisame, who can fight perfect Jinchuriki, 8 tails Killer B, the 4 tails Jinchuriki, and is nicknamed the tailless tailed beast because of his massive reserves of chakra. Itachi, who is presented as above the level of a Sannin level threat, who scaled to people like Old Man Hiruzen, who should be stronger than Kakashi in part 1, that actually scales to just part 1 Kisame. Kisame does get massively stronger after fighting Kakashi, but he was still in the Akatsuki, so he should be at least Biju level at that point still. Then I'm sure you can draw from here a lot of other characters who would fit this criteria. If you're maybe concerned about the implication of Kakashi in part 1 being Biju level, let me just remind you that the only people Kakashi actually loses to in the verse half the time is Akatsuki members anyway. He might not have the Biju levels of chakra reserves or anything like that, but he's constantly fighting these above Biju level characters, and it's pretty clear he's supposed to be the #1 Jonin in the village, only beneath people like Hiruzen or maybe the Sani. Now, what exactly is Biju level? If all these people scale to it, how important of a tier could it really be? The thing about this is, we only really get to see the strong people of the verse fight each other when we get to see major battles. It's typically between top tiers of the current arc, and if they fight fodder, the fodder get dealt with like fodder. As such,
Correct.
a few examples being, one of the first few fights we see in Shippuden is Gaara versus Deidara, and Deidara, who literally beats up the Three Tails and almost obliterates Gaara's village with one bomb, until Gaara himself has to cover up the entire village with a massive cloud of sand. Then we see Orochimaru, one of the Sannin, go up against what is described by Jiraiya as a miniature nine-tailed fox as he clashes with the fourth-tail version of Naruto, who launches a Biju bomb that knocks over 3 Rashomon gates and obliterates the surrounding forest, and is stated to have almost killed Jiraiya. And Orochimaru comments that if he came into contact with this Biju bomb, even he would die, even though he has this crazy regeneration.
Correct.
Lastly, we don't get to see it, but we're told that Hidan was able to take down the Two Tails, so there's also that. Being Biju level still puts you above the majority of the ninja world, and I mean, if you think about it, we see less than 100 people fight in Naruto, in the main fights that is. Compare that to the 80,000 shinobi that form the Shinobi Alliance, and you see that if we assume anyway, most of the people we see here outscale the randoms, which is likely the case, you get the conclusion that only 0.3% of the active shinobi are Biju level. So it's still a pretty strong tier of power.
It's a numbers game.
The Akatsuki on their own are all stated to be S-class
argument.
criminals who have done one or another heinous crime and can each by themselves take out at least a 1,000 man army. But that's enough about them as a group. I'm sure that even if you agree with me that Madara would beat the Akatsuki, you recognize that their tier of power is nothing to scoff at, and it's certainly not weak. Let's get into talking about the Akatsuki as individuals. There are some of the so-called evolved arguments that are just blatantly bad and need to be debunked. To get into this, I'm going to have to sort of rank the Akatsuki. So I'm going to take a page from my friend Seth's book, and instead of ranking them one by one, I'm just going to put them into separate tiers. The first tier, for the sake of simplicity, will be called low tier. Then it would follow the next ones are both mid tier and high tier. First up on the low tier list is Zetsu. Now this one is actually ridiculous, and I'm sure it started as a meme at first, but once the edgelords got a hold of it and started flexing their debater man power, more and more people started actually believing it. It's the idea that Black Zetsu at the end of Shippuden actually speed blitzed Three-Eyed Madara so he could kill Madara alone. This is just actually absurd. There are a few ways to get around this argument, so I'll take this one at a time. The first way is that Madara trusts Black Zetsu, and there's this thing with Madara where he only gets beaten by people who take his backside, and the only two people to ever do that were both people he trusted, Hashirama and Zetsu. Hashirama did so in the Valley of the End at the climax of their battle after Madara started touting victory over Hashirama, who was currently on the floor. Since Madara didn't have his Sharingan on, which gives him the ability to see through the clone ruse, he was unable to tell that Hashirama on the floor was a clone, and Hashirama, who Madara had just told prior to the fight that no one could take his back, ends up literally backstabbing his friend. There's a lot more narrative significance in this moment that I won't cover here, but I can cover in a future video if anyone is interested. Anyway, the same thing is happening here with Zetsu. Madara starts touting victory with Zetsu behind him, and he gets backstabbed by what he believes to be his own living will. Essentially, Madara is weak to those he trusts. Zetsu is not actually stronger than Jubi Madara.
Yeah, of course.
I can't believe I actually had to explain that. Anyway, the next way around this is that Black Zetsu has a host here, which is Obito, and Zetsu can directly make his host stronger, which would mean that this isn't even just Black Zetsu's power, it's Zetsu plus Obito, who's also being amped by 6 past power that he has left over from being Jubito. Zetsu, like always, is still just that weird intel plant-like guy, and that is it. Next up we have Hidan. Hidan is quite literally the slowest in the Akatsuki, as stated by himself, but there is some fairly absurd scaling going around that Hidan could actually beat up Madara on his own.
Come on.
My way of debunking this might be a bit counterintuitive to what I mentioned earlier, but bear with me, I'll fix it afterwards.
Ridiculous.
The argument goes as follows. Hidan beat the Two Tails on his own, and since Kakuzu said he was going to let him handle it by himself, the Two Tails damaged Madara in the war arc, so Hidan should scale around blind Sage Mode Madara level. Now I'm sure you can tell, even within the argument itself, why this just sounds incredibly wrong and absurd, but some people actually believe it, so here we are. Anyway, we don't actually know if Hidan is the one to beat the Two Tails itself, and I'll explain why. We know from Naruto it's possible for a Biju.
I'd also like to add this. Just because someone can damage you doesn't mean they scale to you. If a fucking little kid hits, let's say they hit me in the face and it hurts, does that mean that in the event that we were to battle, the kid would beat me in a battle just because he can damage me? That's fucking fallacious, man. That's a very fallacious and absurd argument to use. Just because someone can damage you doesn't mean that in the event that you guys were to battle, they would scale to you and be competitive. I can go punch Mike Tyson in the face. It's going to hurt him. But that means I can compete with him in a real altercation? Come on, man. Use some fucking common sense. That's just a ridiculous, fallacious argument. Let's continue, though.
Jinchuriki to have a time limit on their link. Yugito handed herself over to the Two Tails at the beginning of their fight, and when it cuts back, all we see is Yugito is captured and Hidan is the victor. Considering we have no sort of context to the actual fight, it's possible Yugito's transformation just wore off and Hidan beat up a base Yugito. To make this a bit more consistent, Hidan gets burned by the residual heat of a Two Tails fireball, whilst the fireball actually blows up in the Two Tails face and it's unharmed, and Hidan calls himself a trapped mouse against a cat-like Biju. Now, this may seem counterintuitive, like I said earlier, but allow me to explain. A thing to note is we don't actually know if all the Biju are relative to each other in power. So Hidan could be Biju level, but just be weaker than this Biju. But even if you do think Hidan is stronger, there's another way to get past this argument. Madara is simply holding back on the Biju. At first he does make a comment at Zetsu to indicate this. He tells Zetsu that possessing Hashirama's cells causes him to fight with less refinement, meaning he isn't at his best and essentially holding back because he knows he can just heal. Next up is Konan. Now Konan is only going down here because I have absolutely no idea where to scale her. Most of her scaling comes from the video game continuity or the anime, which I'm not using in this video. The only thing she does is like failing at beating Obito at prep time, and she only damages him while he's holding back, and she loses to Jiraiya in like 5 seconds. So yeah, I don't know what to say for her, but I don't think anyone thinks she's doing anything to Madara anyway, so we can just move on to our next tier of power. Now, to introduce the mid-tier combatants of the Akatsuki, we have Sasori, Deidara, Kakuzu, and Kisame. There is no particular order on display here. Like I mentioned earlier, that all of these people should just be around the same tier. Aside from Kisame anyway, you could honestly move him up to high tier. He's definitely the strongest one out of all 4 of these.
I agree.
Speaking of, we'll get into him first. I covered Kisame in the video I did with my friend Shiggy on Kisame vs Jiraiya. You can check that out if you want it, but I'll briefly cover him again here. Kisame in part 1 is only sort of impressive. He definitely feels much weaker there than he does in early part 2 and the later parts of Shippuden. Essentially in part 1, we're told Kisame would struggle fighting a clone of part 1 Kakashi's and that he wouldn't get away from it uninjured. And then he sort of gets beat by base Guy. Then the next time we see him, which is in Shippuden during the Kazekage rescue arc, with the 30% clone, he subdues all of Team Guy, and after creating a giant lake of water, forces Might Guy to use the 6th gate just to deal with him. There is some skepticism surrounding this argument saying, oh, well maybe Guy didn't need to use the 6th gate. He just wanted to make sure that Kisame was dealt with. Not only is this stupid for someone as smart as Guy to use a technique that can mess up your body for such a petty reason, but he does say before activating it that he has no choice, which would imply that the 5th gate isn't going to be enough and to beat up the clone, which is why he went to the 6th gate. On top of that, we see Kisame capture the 4 Tails Jinchuriki on his own, beat up B badly and then call him disappointing, and go on to sort of fight even in terms of jutsu speed and launching with 7th gate Guy, although he does lose it to the end of him. Kisame has received his own fair share of wink though due to the 7th gate Guy scaling. People are starting to claim Kisame can actually move Madara Susanoo and outspeed it. However, this is wrong due to Guy getting stronger during the war. Next up is Sasori. This section for the most part is just going to be me getting rid of some downplay Sasori has, mostly for losing to Sakura or having a somewhat even battle with her. But not only is Sakura not exactly weak, she had help from Granny Chiyo basically the whole fight, and Sasori for the most part wasn't going all out on them. The only time Sakura is actually scaling to Sasori as well is either when she has a mental imp or when she's learned to read his movements after being controlled by Chiyo for the whole battle. Sasori also in the end chose not to continue the fight. He literally let himself die, and even Chiyo could see that. Sasori is downplayed a lot because of that fight, and it's not really anything even all that bad. Next we have Deidara. Obviously Deidara's whole thing is art is an explosion, blah blah. It's predicated on his explosive clay and the chakra level to his bombs C0 through C4. I'll read out the databooks explanation on these individually since Deidara's scaling isn't really contentious in the community. Most people agree he's below Sasori and somewhat around heavy Sasuke level based on their fight, but neither of these placements really matter when putting him up against Madara. C1 is tiny clay bombs with the least amount of force put into them. C2 is riding on top of a dragon-shaped clay bomb that spits out guided smart bombs. C3 is Deidara's strongest bomb outside of C0. C4 is nano-sized cells destroying bombs that kill you if you inhale them. C0 was an unliving bomb, Deidara's ultimate technique that unfortunately takes his life as well. On top of this, you have like Deidara beating the Three Tails, Kisame saying Deidara is one of the strongest members of the Akatsuki in his opinion, and the databook saying the more Deidara gets pressed in combat, the better his performance is. Deidara is definitely no joke. Next we have Kakuzu. I don't know why I even had to get into this. Kakuzu would very clearly speed blitz every path of pain. In terms of raw durability, he outscales them. He fought Hashirama and lived, and Madara didn't, so he would clearly beat Madara. No, obviously I'm joking, but Kakuzu is pretty strong. He's definitely above Kakashi's level, but not by much. Kakashi definitely could have taken him out with Kamui like he said he was going to Naruto after the fight if he didn't show up. Kakuzu doesn't really have any hacks, so there's not really much else to cover outside of what I already just mentioned, besides the fact he has 5 hearts and can essentially add teammates to the Akatsuki's team, since the hearts can leave his body and fight autonomously. Moving on to the high tiers in the Akatsuki, like I mentioned earlier, you could definitely say Kisame has a spot here if you so choose. Nothing much would really change though. He should still be weaker than the top 3. Which I'm sure everyone knows who the top 3 are. Of course. They're the top 3 on literally everyone's Akatsuki list. Even if you're not ranking them the same way, Itachi, Obito, and Pain are at the top of all of the list. Now, I want to go over these 3 in much more detail in a future video, so I'm only briefly going to cover them here. And then if you want a better explanation, you're going to have to watch the other video I put out later. Itachi is extremely strong shinobi, having chakra control on the level of maybe early Shippuden Sakura as just a 5-year-old. And we see how Kakashi reacts to Sakura's chakra control during the second bell test. On top of that, he's got Amaterasu and Tsukuyomi, both jutsu that KCM1 Naruto says would end the fight for both him and B when up against Edo Itachi. And I know there is debate to be had on if Edo Itachi is stronger than his alive self or not, but if you think he is stronger, Naruto is saying this based on his interaction with Amaterasu before, which was sick Itachi's Amaterasu right outside the Uchiha hideout.
That's a good point.
Yeah, even he could kill KCM Naruto and B with it. Pain literally killed the Leaf Village, which is 1/5 of the Shinobi Alliance and the strongest village stated in Databook 3. Among the other crazy shit Pain has done, and he possesses the Rinnegan. Pain is also stated in the original weekly release of the manga to be the strongest man in the Akatsuki. If you don't know, those little texts on the side of the page are there because maybe you read Naruto on Viz or something where they aren't present. These text blurbs are put in by Kishimoto at the end or beginning of every chapter weekly to get people hyped for the next chapter. But since when the manga is officially printed in Viz, you can sort of just, turn the page. They don't have a place there, so they get removed. Obito is just directly stated by Minato to be a bigger threat than Pain. One that he thinks Naruto needs to master the full 9 tails to actually beat. That may sound as if it's in conflict with what I just said about Pain being the strongest, but you must remember that at this point in time, while masquerading as Madara, Obito has built up this story for his Madara character that since the battle with Hashirama, he's severely damaged and is too weak to really do anything, even though we all know in actuality Obito did not fight Hashirama as he was literally not alive. So these 3 are definitely the strongest in the Akatsuki.
Agreed.
The thing is though, every version of Madara that I've listed so far sort of just laughs at all the levels of power on display here, but we'll go through them one at a time. 1. For Obito, even with his Kamui hacks blah blah blah, sees Madara get summoned by Kabuto and he is very clearly in fear of Madara's capabilities. Before Madara was summoned, Obito was all cocky, talking down to Kabuto and clearly not taking him serious. But after he's summoned, his demeanor changes completely. He compliments Kabuto for being such a quote-unquote formidable vessel and accepts Kabuto's offer due to Madara's presence. Now, I'd like to take this time to correct some misinformation given by me on accident in my video on Madara and Hashirama vs Jubito, where I showed a databook scan from the last movie saying Edo Madara and White Mask Obito are around the same level of power. This is actually a mistranslation of what the scan actually says, which is Obito, who is still alive, and Madara, who was revived through Edo Tensei, both raged against the shinobi world with their overwhelming fighting power. For anyone who was going to try to call me out for contradicting myself, but I do apologize for the unintentional spread and misinfo. Another way around this in terms of this battle is to say that this was Rinnegan Obito that is stated to be at this level of power, and the Rinnegan gives Obito a huge boost in power, so it wouldn't have any bearing on this fight in the first place. And from there, I'm sure you can gather that if Madara can beat Obito, he could probably run through the other members of the Akatsuki as well, considering Obito is the strongest they've got. And that's just Edo Madara. This comes much worse with other forms of Madara.
Oh, yeah.
For one, EMS Madara is just Edo Madara, but having a stronger body and the ability to summon the Nine Tails. The full Nine Tails, that is, you know, doubled the size and power of the one Pain had to struggle and bring out his strongest jutsu just to seal away. There is this weird idea that teamwork is going to play a factor in this fight. Bro, no. The Majestic Sire, the Perfect Susanoo, is simply getting rid of the whole teamwork idea. Where was the teamwork when the 5 Kage jumped Madara? Where was the teamwork when the Shinobi Alliance jumped Madara? Where's the idea that the Akatsuki can even work well as a team come from? They're a group of people that have giant AoE attacks that could possibly harm their other teammates. But what happens when Chibaku Tensei comes out and all the Akatsuki members get sealed? Assuming that would even work in the first place, Madara would just blow it up with a Nine Tails Biju Bomb. Sasori's poison would likely work on this version of Madara, but it's dependent on if he can even get the move off in the first place when Madara is so much faster than him. Deidara's bombs get negged the same way Sasuke negged them, but worse. And overall, no one in the Akatsuki can really do anything to Madara to even make it a fair fight, even with their teamwork. Rinnegan Sage Mode Madara is just complete overkill. I mean, it's literally just Limbo clone GG, and then the Akatsuki can see it. Overall, I think I've made it abundantly clear that Madara is going to overwhelm the Akatsuki. Not that I really needed to do this, I just wanted to give my thoughts on the topic, and it's a pretty easy subject to cover. I also thought you guys might enjoy it, so yeah. As always, if you enjoyed what you saw, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. I do stuff like this regularly, so consider coming back. I have a Discord server as well if you want to discuss anything with me or my friends about my videos, but other than that, have a nice day.
Great video 6.
The new TV.
Alright folks, there you guys have it. It's actually a very good video. Very good video. His claim was the same as the others. Right? Just fallacious arguments and the appeal to emotion. You know, fallacious arguments appeal to emotion. That's what a lot of these horrible arguments come from. Like Hidan scaling to the Two Tails and the Two Tails damaging Madara. Hence, Hidan fucking scales to Madara and would compete with him in an interaction, in a violent interaction. That is fucking fallacious. It's a horrible argument. Horrible. Or Kakazu, because he survived an encounter with the first Hokage, which highly likely was because Hashirama spared him. He is on this astronomical level and fucking scales to Hashirama and Madara. Like, that's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous argument. 6 he did a pretty good job debunking a lot of horrible arguments, and it's a shame that he even has to, right? Because they're terrible. They are terrible, and people revere these just horrible arguments that you can debunk quite easily. A lot of people don't like to accept what's narratively being implied. They don't want to accept that, right? Like the Kakazu thing. It's a meme now because it's ridiculous. People think that Kakazu can really beat Pain, when the narrative is Pain is the leader of the Akatsuki and Obito is the real leader behind the scenes, right? Yet they think someone that is his subordinate would defeat him. It's ridiculous, right? Someone that swapped hand with Kakashi and was competitive with him when Itachi nearly killed him, and Itachi has always been superior to, and is superior to Orochimaru, who Kakashi shat his pants looking at and would never want to try and spar if he doesn't have to, can somehow beat Pain. They think that individual, Kakuzu, could beat Pain. It's fucking ridiculous. It's fucking ridiculous. I don't understand. There's just some horrible arguments out there. It's a clear appeal to emotion. And honestly, what the problem is as well, is there's a lot of egos involved. A lot of egos involved. They don't want to give up any ground in the anime community. They want to stick by their fallacious and absurd arguments till death do them part. Right? It's unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. But yeah, Madara stops the Akatsuki clearly. He has more AP. He has the superior speed. And he has the abilities to probably deal with multiple Akatsuki members at once. If he uses the majestic Susanoo attire on the Ninetales, right, and combines that and just goes at them, they're fucked. There's not going to be a damn thing they can do. None of them. And he solos. It's really that simple. Right? It's a shame that this even has to be explained sometimes, or re-explained so many times. Right? Like Six said, Swag and Seth's videos about Madara vs. Akatsuki now at this point in time have probably accumulated 6 million views all together. And there's still people that believe that the Akatsuki could somehow beat Madara. It's ridiculous. It's truly ridiculous. But yeah, folks, this is my thoughts on it. Madara stomps the Akatsuki. I'm sure the majority of you agree. And I'm sure the majority of you ranked the Akatsuki the right way, similar to how Six did. He ranked them very fairly, and I agree with the tiers that he created and who he put in those respective tiers. He's right about that. I hope you folks enjoyed my thoughts and Six's thoughts. If you guys disagree, of course, let me know in the comments. I'm still interested to hear disagreements, agreements, comments, opinions, whatever the case may be. Leave them in the comments. I'm always interested to hear. And if you have any recommendations, also leave that in the comments as well. And I'll catch you in the next video. This is Jay the Great signing out. Peace.